All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to take a deep dive into something that's got me honestly a little puzzled. I'm talking about newspaper endorsements, or I guess I should say the lack of them. This time around, we're talking about the presidential race. And things are, well, they're getting a little strange, to say the least. If you like what you hear, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. And as always, we love hearing from you, so leave a comment down below and tell us what you think. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, it definitely is a little strange. USA Today, they just made an announcement, and I don't know if you saw this. They're joining the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times and saying no to endorsing any particular presidential candidate this time around.
So that's FOUR major newspapers now?
That's a lot.
That's a full-blown trend.
It seems like.
Yeah, it's not just a coincidence. And it's interesting because I was just thinking back to 2020. In USA Today, they went all out. They endorsed Biden. They even called Trump a narcissist in their editorial.
Oh, yeah. They didn't hold back at all. And they had their reasons. They called it an extraordinary moment that demanded an extraordinary response. But now, here we are a few years later, and they're singing a different tune.
Yeah. Now they're all about focusing on local elections and sticking to the facts. What do you think is going on? I mean, obviously the media landscape has changed a lot since 2020, right?
Yeah. I mean, social media is a huge factor these days. Everybody is online arguing.
And trust in traditional media is definitely not what it used to be.
Yeah, they're really in a difficult position, I think, newspapers are, because they're trying to stay relevant. They want to maintain their credibility, and it's really hard to do that in this kind of hyper-partisan environment that we're in now.
Right. So maybe they're thinking, okay, if we just stay out of it, if we just don't endorse anyone, then maybe that will help.
Could be.
But then you had to think about, USA Today isn't just one newspaper. They have all these local publications too. Yeah. Over 200. So what does that mean for those papers? Do they have the freedom to make your own endorsements? Or are they going to follow the lead of the main brand?
It's hard to say. I mean, imagine the Palm Beach Post, for example, which covers Trump's home turf down in Mar-a-Lago. What if they endorsed someone? That would be a huge controversy, I'm sure.
Yeah, that would definitely ruffle some feathers.
It seems like they're trying to avoid that kind of situation.
Right. But then you have the Washington Post and the LA Times, which are both owned by billionaires. They also opted out. So it's not just about avoiding local controversy. It seems like there's something bigger going on.
It definitely makes you think about who's really calling the shots. Does a billionaire owner have more power to sway public opinion than a publicly traded company like Gannett, which owns USA Today? It's a very interesting question.
It is. And it brings up a lot of other questions, too. Like, we talked about the decline of trust in media, and we talked about social media, and now you have this issue of billionaire owners. What else are we missing here? What other factors could be playing a role in all of this?
Well, there's something that the Poynter Institute said that I thought was really interesting. They pointed out that shrinking newsrooms are also a big part of the problem.
Oh, yeah. They're laying off reporters left and right.
And if you have fewer reporters, that means you have less time and resources to dedicate to researching and writing those really in-depth endorsements that newspapers used to be known for.
So it's not just a philosophical issue, it's also a practical one.
Right. And, there's also that whole perception problem that we were talking about earlier, where readers have a hard time separating editorial opinions from objective reporting. So if a newspaper endorses someone, some readers are automatically going to think, oh, well, they're biased.
Yeah, and that can really damage their credibility.
Exactly. So it's a catch-22.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. But in the midst of all of this, there is one major newspaper that actually did endorse a candidate, the New York Times.
Oh, right. They endorsed Kamala Harris.
Yep. The only one. So it's a very bold move. And it makes you wonder, what kind of impact will that have in today's media environment? Will it even make a dent, or will it just get lost in the noise?
It's almost like they're trying to make a statement. Like, hey, we still matter. Listen to us. But is anyone really listening?
That's the big question. And it brings up a much bigger question about...
Hold that thought, because we're just getting started. And we'll be back right after this quick break.
What we were just talking about, it really makes you think about what this all means, like for the future of politics. How we talk about these things and how voters are actually making decisions.
Yeah. So are you saying that this whole thing with newspapers backing off from endorsements, it actually has like a bigger picture implication?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes you wonder, will this actually lead to people doing more of their own research? Actually digging into the platforms and the track records of these candidates instead of just, blindly following whoever the newspaper tells them to vote for.
Or could it have the opposite effect?
It could. Yeah. I mean, it could make things worse. And we're already seeing so much polarization in our society, you know? What if this just pushes people further into their own echo chambers, where they're only hearing what they already agree with?
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it's something to consider. I mean, some people would say that endorsements were always biased anyway, right?
Right.
It's just the opinions of a small group of editors.
And they don't necessarily reflect the views of all of their readers.
Exactly.
But at the same time, for a lot of people, newspapers were kind of like a guidepost, right?
Yeah.
Like they didn't have time to go and do all the research themselves, become political science experts.
Right.
So they kind of relied on these newspapers to say, okay, we did the homework for you.
Yeah.
And this is who we think you should vote for.
And so now if they're not doing that, are they shirking their responsibility in a way? I mean,
Yeah.
are they abandoning their role in holding candidates accountable and giving us a platform to actually, analyze the issues and debate them?
So it's like this weird balance
Right.
between, staying neutral and maybe reaching more people
Yeah.
versus, taking a stand
Yeah.
and potentially alienating some of your readers.
Right. And then there's the question of whether endorsements even matter as much as they used to. In this day and age, with social media and the 24/7 news cycle and everybody just yelling at each other all the time, does it even matter what one newspaper thinks?
I mean, I guess that's a valid question.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? I mean, what happens if endorsements really do become a thing of the past?
Well, on a very practical level, I think political campaigns are going to have to find new ways to connect with voters.
Yeah.
They can't just rely on those big endorsements to get them elected anymore.
Right. So more grassroots organizing, more
Yeah,
face-to-face interaction.
exactly. And on a broader societal level, I think this could actually accelerate the fragmentation that we're already seeing in the media landscape.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already talked about the decline of trust in traditional institutions,
Right.
and this could just add fuel to the fire.
So if people don't have those trusted sources to turn to, are they just going to, go to less credible outlets or just check out of the process completely?
It's a possibility. And it's definitely something to be concerned about because we need a well-informed electorate in order to make good decisions.
Right.
But if everyone's just stuck in their own little echo chambers,
Yep.
How can we even have a productive conversation about the issues that matter?
It seems like we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
Yeah, we are. It really all comes down to critical thinking and media literacy and being willing to engage with viewpoints that are different from our own.
Which is easier said than done.
It is. But those are the skills that we're going to need in order to navigate this new world.
For sure. This is definitely giving me a lot to think about. I'm sure our viewers have some thoughts on this as well. Speaking of our viewers, so before we jump into the comments, you were about to say something about newspapers losing their grip as like the gatekeepers of information.
Yeah. It's almost like, they're holding on for dear life, but the ground is shifting beneath them. The whole power dynamic is changing right before our eyes.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more.
Well, for decades, newspapers, they were the authority.
Right?
Their endorsements, they carried real weight. I mean, they could make or break a candidate sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
But now with social media and blogs and, everybody's got a platform, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, it's like anybody with a smartphone can suddenly become a political commentator.
Exactly. And that's both exciting and terrifying.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
on the one hand, it gives a voice to people who were traditionally shut out of the conversation. But on the other hand, it's like a breeding ground for misinformation and propaganda.
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yeah.
So much more information out there, but so much more noise to sift through.
And that's why it's more important than ever to be able to think critically and evaluate sources. We can't just blindly accept everything we see online. We have to be able to spot bias and, separate fact from fiction. Otherwise, we're just playing into the hands of the people who want to manipulate us.
So bringing it all back to our original topic,
Yeah.
What does this mean for the future of elections? Are we headed towards a world where endorsements are basically meaningless? Or will they find a way to adapt and stay relevant?
I don't know. It's really hard to say. We're in uncharted territory here. But one thing is clear. The old rules don't apply anymore.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We're all swimming in this sea of information. We have to figure out how to navigate it.
So it's not just about newspapers figuring out their role. It's about all of us as voters and as citizens,
Yeah.
Becoming more discerning and more engaged in the process.
Exactly. The future of our democracy might just depend on it.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to think about. From shrinking newsrooms to billionaire owners.
to the rise of social media and the decline of trust in traditional institutions. It's clear that the landscape of newspaper endorsements is changing, and it's raising some really big questions about how we consume information, how we participate in the political process, and what role the media will play in all of this moving forward. So, what do you think about all this? Hit us up in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. And if you found this deep dive insightful, please give us a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for joining us.